Hi guys, it's me ChazRHD and welcome this morning to the race preview for today's 2022 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix from Imola. Hopefully you guys are doing well and hopefully you're excited for what could be a very exciting Grand Prix. And I do stress could, I might be able to give you an update as to this very soon when the Porsche Super Cup race starts at Imola, which I'm about to... it's about to appear on my TV screen that's on in the background. It could be a wet one or a wet-dry one, we'll have to see. Of course, last year's Grand Prix at Imola was wet for pretty much the first half of the race, and it was. I thought last year's Grand Prix was a very, very good Grand Prix, and the driving and the racing in general we saw in the wet, I thought was pretty exciting. So it would be great if we could get some rain for the race. We do still have kind of a mixed up grid, I think, for the Grand Prix. I still think there are, say, certain drivers who I know are capable of a lot more that are out of position. So I still think even if it's bone dry, I think we do have a good race on our hands. Plenty of battles will be had. There's no doubt about that. And I'm just looking, because they've just showed the Porsche Super Cup. They're now just showing it, and it is raining at Imola. I don't know if it's going to be wet for the start of the race, obviously, because the start of the F1 race is in about 3 hours' time, but there you go. It was dry for the F2 race, and now it has begun to pour now, so maybe it'll get worse during the day. Hopefully not too bad. But, yeah, I think we're in for an exciting race no matter what, to be honest. The fight for victory was great in the sprint race. I think it'll be even better in the Grand Prix. And then Perez and Sainz, I'm sure, will have a decent fight. And then the midfield will be a great continuous battle. And, of course, you've got some drivers in there who surely will be able to move their way up. Drivers like probably Alonso, Russell, Hamilton, Ocon, Gasly. So this is not going to be a mediocre Grand Prix. I think we're going to get plenty of action later on. And of course, in this preview, I will take you through what I expect to happen, and yeah, what is most likely to happen, in my opinion, in this Grand Prix today, and what my predictions are pretty much for the race today. Hopefully you guys, by the way, are doing well ahead of the race in a few hours' time. And again, like I said yesterday, of course, because this is my first Grand Prix weekend in terms of doing content, my first Grand Prix weekend of the year. Great to be back, and I cannot wait to do the race watch-along later. My first race watch-along in, well, obviously a while, since the infamous Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And yeah, I think it's going to be a good one, so I can't wait for that. But before I go through all the teams and kind of review how they did in the sprint, but also get into how I think they'll do most likely in the race, let's first read out the starting grid as it stands for the 2022 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. So, Max Verstappen will start on pole position. Charles Leclerc will start second. That is going to be a great battle all race long. Sergio Perez will start in third place. Carlos Sainz fourth, and then Norris fifth. Ricciardo sixth. Bottas seventh. Magnussen eighth. Alonso ninth, and Mick Schumacher will start in P10. And then Russell will be P11, Yuki Tsunoda P12, Sebastian Vettel P13, Lewis Hamilton 14th place. It's still, I just cannot believe how poor Mercedes have been, but how Hamilton is just that far down. Again, it's just such a surprise to me. Stroll 15th, Ocon 16th, Gasly 17th, Albon 18th, Latifi 19th, and Guanyu in last place. Of course, he's in last place, and the reason Gasly's in 17th is because those two made contact. To be honest, though, with Gasly, I don't think he would have finished that much higher, because he started the sprint race in 17th, and the AlphaTauri wasn't that quick, so I don't think he was going to be up in the top 10 or anything like that. But that is your starting grid for the race later on. And just looking again at the Porsche Super Cup race that's about to start at Imola. Just want to see what the track condition is like, if they will show it in a moment. And it's raining, but it's not, the track is not absolutely wet, to the point of needing if it was this condition later on for the F1 race. It's not wet to the point that you would need an intermediate tyre. It's more of a damp to, it's probably wet enough to the point where you have to use an intermediate tyre, but it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be absolutely the best conditions, let's say, for an intermediate tyre. Saying that, the rain is really starting to pour down now. But on the starting grid, it doesn't actually look as bad in terms of what the track condition itself looks like on the ground compared to what is coming down from the sky. But like I said, we'll see later as to whether this rain continues and whether the track will be properly wet for the Grand Prix start later. But let's now get into the teams, and we'll start with Ferrari. Of course, it's a home Grand Prix, the first home Grand Prix of 2022. The first real Grand Prix here at Imola with a crowd since 2006, of course. The 2020 and 2021 races here obviously didn't have a crowd. We all know why, because of COVID. So this is the first chance in a while for the Tifosi to cheer on the Scuderia at this famous and, well, sometimes sadly infamous racetrack in Italy. I thought the sprint race yesterday was a bit surprising in the way Ferrari were. So obviously Leclerc got into the lead at the end of on the first lap down to turn 1. Then of course the safety car came out. Leclerc then got not even got a brilliant restart. He conducted the restart from his perspective really, really well. Instead of letting Verstappen just get a run on him, down the pit straight, he made sure to bolt out of, it was in between the two Ravazzas, the two final corners, because he knew that the Ferrari had an advantage over the Red Bull in, corner exit speed and just corners in general. It does have an advantage, there's no doubt about that. So that's why Leclerc, bolted when he did, and it was a brilliant restart, because I was thinking at the time maybe Verstappen was going to put Charles Leclerc under quite a bit of pressure, but he wasn't able to, Max. And then Leclerc then built a, 1.5 second lead, and I honestly thought that Leclerc had pretty much got the job done, because I felt as though he really, all he had to do, and I thought he was at the time doing it, just managing his tyres and managing the pace and just keeping things, just as they were, and not pushing too hard. But it turns out that maybe he was pushing maybe slightly too hard, because the Ferrari, the reason the Red Bull and Max Verstappen was able to close up to Charles Leclerc is because the Ferrari burnt out its tyres too quickly. Now, the only reason that could explain that, because Ferrari, after the sprint race, did come out and say, and I think Charles Leclerc came out and said that they were surprised about that, that they suffered with that issue. The only way to explain that is really that, it was at the time a very green, fresh circuit, and of course when there's less grip on the track because there's been rain and stuff like that, your tyres are going to wear out quickly. When there's a lot more rubber down, the tyres are not going to give out, anywhere near as quickly as they would, again, if it's a green track, because the grip isn't there. So I think that's really the reason why that happened. And then, of course, Max Verstappen got past Charles Leclerc and ended up winning the sprint. So really, looking at this race, that's the only thing really to look at or look out for, is will Ferrari yet again suffer with tyre problems? It's hard to say because, of course, they're going to be running a lot more fuel. The sprint race yesterday was only 1/3 distance. It was, 21 laps, and the Grand Prix later is going to be, 62, 63 laps. So it's hard to say because, again, running more fuel. The track, I mean, if it's wet like it is now for the Porsche Super Cup race, then they won't have to worry really about tyre wear because, I mean, tyre wear is important to a certain extent in the rain, but it's not as important. It's a lot more about just finding grip. It is in the rain when it comes to the tyres. So, yeah, it's hard to say whether that'll happen again. If it does, let's say, dry out for the start of the race and we get a dry race, then maybe it could happen again because, of course, all the rubber that was laid down yesterday and this morning by the F2 race would have gone again. Gone again, meaning that it's a completely green, fresh, new track in terms of grip. So it's hard to say. It is hard to say whether, Ferrari are in the best shape to win this race. Honestly, coming into this weekend, I thought that Charles Leclerc and Ferrari would be just too good for the opposition. And it was looking that way for a lot of the sprint race, but in the end, they had their tyre problems, and then, Max Verstappen was able to capitalise. I'm just looking at, by the way, the Porsche Super Cup. They're doing the formation lap, and it is quite wet around the track. If the F1 cars were out there, they'd probably be on full wet tyres, to be honest. So yeah, I think given what happened with Leclerc in the sprint, and given now we have possibility of rain later, I think we're definitely going to get a very close and just insanely good battle between Max and Charles Leclerc in the rain, in the dry, because, this track, it is kind of like a driver's circuit in terms of the drivers have to make more of a difference around a track like this than they do around a track like Bahrain, for example. So it really does showcase the quality of the driver, a circuit like this. And I think, especially in the rain, I think you're going to get almost a similar situation to last year between Max and Lewis, where for the first half of the Grand Prix, those two were in a completely different race to everybody else. So I think that's what you're probably going to get today. But I think, given that it's raining now, if it is wet for the race later, that even if it does dry out, because the Ferrari suffered those tyre problems on the, greener track, I would have to say it favours Max Verstappen and Red Bull. I think the conditions for race day. And if I was to say right now who I think is going to win, I'd probably go with Max Verstappen. He has, of course, pole position, but if it is a wet Grand Prix, which, I mean, looking at the Porsche Super Cup race now, if it rains for another 2 hours, then it's going to be a wet race because it is really wet at Imola now. I just think it favours Max Verstappen. And of course, last year, he, did a brilliant job holding off Lewis Hamilton, driving so well in the wet, not making any errors. And of course, on Friday, got a pole position for the sprint in the wet as well. So I think Leclerc will be close to Verstappen all race long. And I think it will be a close, fun battle. But I think in the end, as long as Verstappen doesn't make a mistake or Red Bull don't have any reliability problems, I think Max Verstappen will probably win this Grand Prix. And then quickly, with Carlos Sainz, it's hard to say what's going to happen with him. I think in the dry, I don't think his chances against Sergio Perez are that great in the dry, but I think in the wet, I'd probably say Carlos Sainz is the favourite to win that battle. So if it is wet for the Grand Prix later, then I'd probably say Carlos Sainz is likely to finish in third place. But like I said, if it's dry, I'd probably go with Perez. And I think Perez might actually play a very important role in the Grand Prix if it is dry. Because his pace was really impressive yesterday. He caught Charles Leclerc actually almost fully caught him by the end of the sprint race. I know Leclerc was backing off to save tyres, but Sergio's pace was very, very impressive. But to be honest, if Ferrari do get, say, second and third with both cars, I still think that's a pretty good result. Of course, ideally, they'd want to win the Grand Prix, but Verstappen and Red Bull are looking very good this weekend and very formidable in whatever conditions are out there for the race later. Now, for Red Bull, and let me just put it to the transition. There you go. For Red Bull, I think you're probably going to see, with Max Verstappen, if it is wet or even dry, I think if they can keep the lead at the end of the first lap, I think what you're going to see with them, because of the reliability problems they've had, is they are going to be managing, I think, this car a lot during the race to make sure they don't push it too hard. Of course, if they need to push harder during certain points of the Grand Prix, then I think they'll have to, and they absolutely will. But I think from an ideal perspective, what they need, like I said, is to maintain the lead, and try and build some sort of a gap, even if it's a second and a half, 2 seconds, so they can try and manage things out front. Because I think, to be honest, if they're having to push, most of the race or all of the race with Verstappen, the reliability, a reliability issue then could be likely, and that's really the only thing I think that could really stop Verstappen winning this race today, is something like that happening. He's been great all weekend. I can't really fault him. The only thing or maybe you could say him, that he didn't get absolutely bang on the money was at the start of the sprint race, where he almost lost 2 positions at the start. But after that, of course, he got after Charles Leclerc, got the overtake done, and won the sprint race. And he's took a point off of Leclerc so far this weekend. So the gap is down to 45 points. And if Max does win today, win the Grand Prix today, and gets the fastest lap, then the gap would go down to 37 points. Which, if Verstappen starts to win some races, then that's definitely a gap that he can keep, he can keep getting closer to Leclerc, if the gap is only, 35, 40 points, but he does start winning races on a consistent basis. Because we saw last season, Verstappen, he can win races in a row. What was it, from Monaco until the second Austrian race, he won 4 out of 5. And really should have won Baku, which would have been 5 out of 5. So we know we can go on a run of winning Grand Prix, a load of Grand Prix in a row. It just all really depends on the Red Bull car's reliability. And hopefully it does. They can keep it together, because I think it'll really rob us of a great battle between Max and Charles. But yeah, I think Max Verstappen, like I said a moment ago with Ferrari, I think Max Verstappen will win this race today, because I just think the conditions, just suit Max better than it does Charles. I do think Max Verstappen is the best driver out of the two at the moment. I think there's absolutely, for me, there's not a massive amount of doubt in my mind about that. Charles Leclerc has been great this season. I'm not going to deny that. Charles Leclerc is a very, very good driver, but I still think that in an equal situation, in terms of if the two cars are equalish on pace, I still think Max Verstappen is the man out of those two. So, in, wet conditions, tricky conditions, I think Max Verstappen has the edge, and I think he will get the job done. Sergio Perez, it will be interesting to see how if it is wet, how he gets on, because I remember the Grand Prix last year, if you remember, he started on the front row, actually out-qualified Max Verstappen, but then had a terrible race. He had no pace in the wet, and then he spun when it dried out because he hit a wet patch, I remember, and then ended up finishing, what was it, 11th or 12th? It's just a really bad race for him, even though his pace in the dry on the Saturday last year was, so good. So, like I said, it'd be interesting to see how he does. Hopefully, he will not just fall off the edge of a cliff pace-wise like he did last year. Last year, he was at least a second a lap off the pace of Max Verstappen in the wet. So, yeah, we'll see how Sergio does. But as long as they stay reliable, both cars, I think they can absolutely get a very good result, Red Bull, out of this Grand Prix. By the way, before I move on to the next team, which is Mercedes, Red Bull, with their result yesterday and with Mercedes not scoring any points out of the sprint race, Red Bull have now moved ahead of Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship. Red Bull scored 14 points in the sprint race, and Mercedes scored 0 points. So, yeah, that's probably the last time, coming out from the Australian Grand Prix into this Grand Prix, probably the last time this season you're going to see Mercedes ahead of Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. And, yeah, let's just move on to Mercedes. And, yeah, this car, we know it's a bad car at the moment. It absolutely is. To a certain extent, yes, it does have the potential to be better in certain aspects, but it's just not a good car. Let's be honest. It's not as good in any area as the Red Bull or the Ferrari. They don't have the straight line speed. They don't have the grip at the front, the rear, the floor. They just don't have anything really to compete with those two teams. And given the pace difference we saw between the front 2 or 3 compared to where Mercedes were in the sprint race, they were, a second and a half, 2 seconds off the pace? So you could very well see the two Mercedes get lapped today. And I think, actually, it would actually be better in a way. I mean, I guess you could argue it both ways. In the wet, I think you could probably argue that it'd be better for Mercedes because the two drivers could really show their quality as drivers and, push that car, pull that car a bit further up the order than where it has been in the important sessions so far this weekend. But the problem is, with where they're starting, that, and it was a problem yesterday because of a DRS train, they don't have any straight line speed, really, to overtake anyone. And obviously, in the wet, you can't use DRS, and there's only one DRS zone anyway, which is down the pit straight. The point I'm making is, they're not going to be able to overtake anyone in the wet unless it's in the middle sector or something like that, and they have, a second or 2 seconds pace advantage over whoever it is. Because again, they don't have the straight line speed, and in the wet, without DRS, I just don't see how they could possibly overtake anyone. So I don't actually see the wet being that much better for the Mercedes. And as well, you could probably argue that the Mercedes in the wet on Friday was actually worse in terms of pace and grip than it was yesterday in the dry on Saturday. Toto Wolff even said after practice 1 that the Mercedes had absolutely zero grip whatsoever. So, yeah, very dark days for Mercedes. Will they finish in the points? I think they will still. I think Russell or Hamilton will nick a couple points. I cannot believe I'm even saying that. The Mercedes might nick a couple points. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I think they will. I think they'll get a couple points, but not much more than that. The car is just terrible. I think they'll definitely get lapped as well. If it's a race that's only got, say, one safety car, and that one safety car is in the first, say, few laps, and the rest of the race is run under green flag conditions, then I think it's probably going to be yeah, Mercedes getting lapped pretty easily in this Grand Prix by the front four. Just, you know, coming out from testing, I thought, yeah, they don't have the car right now. They have issues, but I didn't think that it would be this bad. I honestly thought by this Grand Prix you'd see Mercedes probably, you know, 3-4 tenths at most away from, say, Verstappen, Leclerc's top of pace. But they look worse now than they did at the start of the season. And this track is supposed to suit their car, or, you know, not exploit their weaknesses as much as a track like Bahrain, where in Bahrain, at least in qualifying, they were only like half a second off pole position. But here, again, we're at a track that shouldn't exploit the weaknesses as much. They're a second slower than that. It's just, again, a very bad car. And I do feel sorry for the two drivers because they deserve way better than what they're driving, especially Lewis Hamilton. And one thing I will say, in regards to Lewis Hamilton, I know people will say, oh, he should be performing better. You know, he's a, 7-time world champion. He holds basically all of the records. You know, Russell, in terms of that team and fighting in a kind of a front-running team, is a rookie. He should be doing a lot better and he shouldn't be being beaten by Russell. I do agree to a certain extent. He should not be beaten by Russell, really, that much. I mean, the Australian Grand Prix, I don't really think we can say Hamilton should have done better. The reason Russell finished ahead of Hamilton in the Australian Grand Prix is because of luck, really. Because Russell pitted under the virtual safety car and Hamilton, I mean, he was gonna beat Russell in that Grand Prix if the virtual safety car did not come out when it did, but or the safety car, one of the two. But the point I want to make is that if Lewis Hamilton is struggling this much with the car, you know, the Lewis Hamilton, then what it means clearly is that this car is bad. Because if the car was good, or if it had, you know, a lot of potential and was not too far away from being a championship winning or race winning car, Lewis Hamilton would not be behind his teammate and 14th on the grid. That just wouldn't happen. So, you know, if Mercedes improve this car and make it more drivable rather than just a shitbox, which is what it is at the moment, for a team like them, it really is a shitbox. If they can make it more drivable, then I have no doubt that Lewis Hamilton will start to beat his teammate and will show us, you know, why he is, for me, the greatest racing driver of all time. But if you give him a car that he can't develop any confidence in because you're constantly bouncing and moving about all over the place, like it's a late 80s or even 90s F1 car, then what do you expect? So, yeah, hopefully Mercedes will improve to a certain extent. I mean, I know a lot of people will say, oh, you know, it's great to see Mercedes struggling. I get that to a certain extent, especially if you're a Ferrari, Red Bull, McLaren fan, or, you know, just maybe if you even just an F1 fan. If you're, you know, happy to see Mercedes not winning it anymore, I can understand why you're happy about that. But considering the two drivers they're employing, I think it is best that they are still kind of in the fight with, you know, Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Sainz, and in that car they're not. The drivers they're fighting are still pretty good drivers, but they're not fighting people that, you know, we really want to see. So yeah. We'll see how they get on later, but I mean, most likely it's going to be terrible. And yeah, I think this is. I mean, if I had been able to, you know, do content for the last Grand Prix or the Grand Prix before, I probably would have said this then. But I'll say this now: Mercedes' dominance has officially come to an end. It's all over. 2014 to 2021. That's when it lasted, and now it's over. And, I mean, next year, by the way, I'm just looking at the Porsche Spring Super Cup race. Jesus fucking Christ. It is drying out. It doesn't appear to be raining anymore. So, yeah, conditions changing. I mean, it's still pretty wet, but there's a dry line starting to form out there. But, yeah, the Mercedes dominance, it's all over. And I think next year, there's definitely a good chance that they could bounce back. Absolutely. They are still a great team. But I think most likely their dominance is over. And if it is over, then all I have to say really is, well, they are, or they were, in their dominant period, probably the greatest F1 team we've seen of all time. And, yeah, it was, I guess for them, fun whilst it lasted. Anyway, let's move on to McLaren, who really, after that poor start to the season, that was not helped at all by the lack of running it in Bahrain because of brake issues and just general reliability issues. And of course, Daniel Ricciardo wasn't helped by, being as ill as he was during the final test with COVID. It's great to see that McLaren are now back. I still don't think they're performing maybe as well as they were hoping for this season, but McLaren, to a certain extent, are back in the fray. 5th and 6th, they finish in the sprint race, and they will lock out 3rd row for today's Grand Prix. And really, I don't think they're really going to finish anywhere else. I think the only cars they need to worry about probably is Bottas, Magnussen, and maybe Alonso behind. And the only reason I say that is because of the lack of straight line speed that the Mercedes powered cars in general do have. Other than that, the McLaren looks absolutely fine. Of course, yesterday they scored... How many points did they score yesterday in the sprint? 7 points, I think it was. Which is a good amount for them to take. And given how Mercedes are looking at the moment, McLaren, you'd have to say, are probably looking at Mercedes and thinking, you know what, we can have them this season. And I think absolutely they can. I mean, they're still, 30 to 35 points behind at the moment, but that's at the moment. If Mercedes don't score any points today, which could happen, it really could happen, then, McLaren finish where they're going to start, 5th and 6th, then that gap will go down to, 10 to 15 points? And the way McLaren are looking in the last 2 races, they look as competitive as Mercedes, when Mercedes are having a good day. So, yeah, I think McLaren, they're looking a lot better. That's great to see, by the way, because after the first 2 races, I was really disappointed. I was like, oh, this is, it really sucks, because I thought coming out of testing that despite the reliability problems, I thought McLaren had a good car in there somewhere. I thought it was definitely slower than the Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, but I still thought to a certain extent it could be competitive with the Mercedes, and I'd probably still say that now. I will say with Mercedes, it is a surprise that they are so bad this weekend, because I thought this weekend they would be where McLaren are for the starting grid, but they would be maybe a 2 or 3 tenths closer to the front 4 on pace, but they're not. They're even worse. So, yeah, I think McLaren, they're looking great. Norris and Ricciardo were pretty equalish on pace towards the second half of the sprint race. But really, given especially his performance around this track last year, I think Lando Norris is most likely going to be the highest placed McLaren. Hopefully for the 2 McLarens, some chaos can happen ahead, and maybe then they can get a podium. Definitely possible. And you never know, given the wet conditions, we know they're 2 very good drivers. You never know what they could get out of this Grand Prix. But if they can just finish really where they're starting the race from, because Mercedes, for example, who I think are probably their main rivals now for the rest of the season, Mercedes are not going to finish any higher at best than P7, because obviously they're not going to, if McLaren can show the pace they showed yesterday, then I don't think McLaren are going to move from 5th and 6th. And then the front 4 are not going to really move unless one of them has a big problem or retires. So, like I said, the Mercedes, at best, is going to get, say, 7th. So, McLaren, if they can get 5th and 6th and score those 18 points, then that would be a nice big chunk taken out of the lead that Mercedes have over McLaren. And, of course, McLaren, I think, finished 5th and 6th, what was it, 2 weeks ago in Melbourne. So, yeah, I think McLaren, looking good. And I think they'll probably get a good result out of this Grand Prix today. And one last thing before I move on to the rest of the teams is, with Mercedes, I actually think McLaren, I'd say McLaren are kind of the favourites to win that fight. And the reason is not because the drivers are better. It's not because, they are a better or stronger team in terms of personnel. It's because McLaren have more wind tunnel time this season because, of course, they finished lower than Mercedes in the championship last season. And that's the biggest problem that I should have mentioned earlier with Mercedes is they don't have the wind tunnel time compared to the other midfield teams that they would need to really pull away from them, because the Mercedes has the least, the Mercedes team has the least amount of wind tunnel time allowed. With the sliding scale aero thing that was brought in a couple years ago, they have the least amount of wind tunnel time allowed. McLaren obviously finished 4th in the championship, so they're allowed 20% more wind tunnel time, which that could see McLaren gain an extra, say, quarter of a second, 0.3 of a second over Mercedes or compared to Mercedes this season. So I honestly think McLaren, I think they can finish 3rd in the championship this season. And I think even though they've kind of disappointed me from the perspective of they're not championship contenders, which I was honestly hoping they would be this season, and I was hoping that this would be the year where they would, finally rise from being an upper midfield team to a title contender and a race-winning team. That hasn't happened as of yet. Maybe next year it'll happen for McLaren. But if they were to finish 3rd in the championship, I think that would still be, considering how their season has been so far and how the car is pace-wise, I think that'd be a pretty good season if they were to finish 3rd. And I think absolutely it is possible. I think after today's race, if they can get at least 5th and 6th of both cars, then I think that's absolutely possible. 3rd in the championship, because the next Grand Prix in Miami, I don't see why Mercedes will have a particular massive advantage over McLaren around that track. And then the Spanish Grand Prix, the Spanish Grand Prix, probably Mercedes will be stronger around that circuit, but I think it'll ebb and flow really during the season. But like I said, with the extra wind tunnel time McLaren will get, and Mercedes are probably going to give up on their car pretty soon. I reckon by mid-season, Mercedes will probably just stop developing their car. I think McLaren will probably just keep developing theirs until the end of the season, as much as they can, given within the cost cap and all of that. I think McLaren, like I said, I think they've got a good chance, and it would be, like I said, a great season for them if they were to do that. Anyway, let's move on now to Haas F1. The sprint yesterday, they still got a good result, 8th and 10th. If they were to get that in a normal dry qualifying, you'd say, good job. But considering where Magnussen started, there's kind of a tinge of disappointment, I think, with how he did in the Grand Prix. And of course, the main reason why Magnussen dropped back is because Haas F1 decided to start both cars on the medium compound tyre. Now, I think Mick Schumacher actually got on better with that tyre. His car looked a bit quicker on that tyre at times than it did for Magnussen. I still don't think, though, it really paid off. I think if they had started on the soft compound tyre, I think they wouldn't. I think Magnussen would not have finished 8th. I think he would have finished maybe 7th or even 6th in the sprint. Now, can he claw back that? What do you call it? Claw back those positions and get up there? Maybe. I think he's got a good chance, but I think really, if you look at, Magnussen's history as a driver, Kevin Magnussen doesn't really tend to be a great race driver. He's had great results in a race, don't get me wrong, but normally his peak of a weekend is in qualifying, which of course qualifying, the qualifying I'm talking about was on Friday where he ended up in P4. When it comes to a race, and especially a long old slog of a race that we're going to get today, and in about, 2.5 hours from now. By the way, track's still pretty wet, but it looks as though it's drying out slightly, the Imola circuit. But yeah, if the race took place now, it'd definitely be a wet Grand Prix. With Magnussen, I just feel as though in a Grand Prix, I don't feel as though he can really make up any ground in a Grand Prix, because he doesn't really have as much talent. He has a lot of talent, but he doesn't really have, I think, the skills to really progress his way up the field and be as good as he can be in a single lap qualifying setting. I think really his fight is going to be with Alonso behind and Valtteri Bottas ahead. I think that's really going to be his fight. If he can finish 7th or 8th, I think that would be a good result, a good return out of this Grand Prix. For Mick Schumacher, I am very curious to see how he gets on. Of course, in the wet or in the damper, less grippy conditions on Friday that we are probably going to get today, Mick didn't do that great. Certainly compared to his teammate Magnussen, he was down in P12, and Magnussen, of course, in Q3 ended up in P4 in the wet. So, yeah, with Mick, I'm curious to see how he does. I think as long as he finishes in the points, I don't think he can really be disappointed. And I think with Haas F1, I think if you're looking at the championship, the Constructors' Championship and the standings, really, I think their rivals for this season are Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Alpine. And with the extra wind tunnel time they will have this season, they'll have more than any other team because they finished last season. And by the way, compared to Mercedes, they'll have like 35% more wind tunnel time. So you never know, Haas could end the season being like much quicker than Mercedes. You never know, it could happen. Could even be a lot quicker than McLaren. You never know. But I think for now, certainly, I think Haas F1's, because of that extra wind tunnel time and the pace of the car at the moment, I think you'd have to say, yeah, Alpine, AlphaTauri, and Alfa Romeo are the main rivals. And I think really, they need to be aiming for 5th in the championship. If they were to finish 5th, that would be, I think, a pretty good season for the Haas F1 team. But I still feel as though there is a bit more potential even than that. Because like I said, they have 30% more wind tunnel time this season allowed than Mercedes are allowed. And Haas this weekend have definitely been quicker than Mercedes. So, you know what I mean? You can see the potential of what they could do in the championship if they are able to consistently score points, but continuously improve that car during the season. And I think the Haas car really will just get better and better and better and better all season long. I don't see them really stopping the development at all on this car. But yeah, in today's Grand Prix, I think most likely they will get I think definitely Magnussen will finish in the points. I'm going to say Magnussen will finish in the top 8. Schumacher, I'm not sure. We'll have to see in the race. It's too hard to predict with him because of who or what drivers are around him. Now let's go on to Alpine. And I don't know, it's been a disappointing weekend for me. I mean, Alonso's what do you call it? Friday qualifying was very good, qualifying in 5th place. But obviously had Ocon down in 19th, and then he only finished 16th in the sprint, which is not a surprise because overtaking, especially in a DRS train, is nigh on impossible around Imola. So it's not a surprise that he ended up not really going anywhere. But even though this track, it shouldn't suit their car as much as, say, the Melbourne, the Albert Park circuit, I still kind of expected more from them in the dry. Yeah, that was just kind of disappointing to me. Alonso just fell back. He almost got caught up at the end by Mick Schumacher and couldn't really deal with or get past Kevin Magnussen when it looked at times as though he did have the pace, but just never really, put a real threat down to Magnussen for his position. So I think the wet for Alpine might actually be a better, it might let them be a bit better in this Grand Prix than maybe they are going to be in the dry, because simply the two drivers, I think in wet conditions, can probably show their worth and be pretty strong in wet conditions. But I just think in the dry, and you never know, it could still be dry for the race later, because I don't see any rain falling at the moment. I don't think any rain has fallen for the last few minutes. Last few minutes. I think in the dry, I just don't think they've got that good of a car. And I think they're almost struggling to a certain extent to actually finish in the points with any of their two cars. So yeah, I think really they'd have to be hoping for rain. The Alpine is a car that is it's similar to the Renault of 2020 in a way. It's not as it's not as strong in the in terms of its straight line speed and just general power and grunt as that 2020 Renault was. But in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of that 2020 Renault, this is what this car reminds me of. And I think that's why, at a track like Melbourne and a track like Jeddah, that's why Alpine looked pretty good and were, at worst, decent and, decently in the points. But around a track like this, they were kind of, or they have been in the dry, just not really up there. Which is, again, it's not a massive surprise, because I didn't think they would be as good around here, because the middle and final sector, you can't really utilise a car that is slippery in a straight line like you can around the Albert Park circuit, the new Albert Park circuit. I know people, by the way, will be saying, oh, well, the Renault, in 2020, Ricciardo finished on the podium. I know, I get that, but that was down to some circumstances. He didn't get that based on pure pace. A lot of things had to go right for him, and a lot of things had to go wrong for others for him to get up there. But yeah, I think for Alpine, you'd probably be looking at this race, looking at the grid, and saying, as long as Alonso doesn't fall out of the points, it's a good race. That's all you can really say. I think Miami, I think this team will probably be a bit stronger, but for this weekend, they're just kind of on the back foot, I feel, of the Alpine team. Now, let's go to Alfa Romeo. And Valtteri Bottas put in yet another stonking performance in the Alfa Romeo. 7th place, made brilliant progress. Overtook, who did he overtake again? It was Vettel, Alonso. His Alonso overtake was, very well executed. Then overtook Magnussen. And at the very end of the race, he was right on the tail of Ricciardo and not too far behind Norris. So you could argue that Bottas is kind of a dark horse for today's race, because the pace of the Alfa Romeo in the sprint race was really good. He could have been, if that race was 10 laps longer, he could have finished in 5th. He really could have finished in 5th. And this Alfa Romeo car is looking pretty good, I have to say, around this circuit. And with Bottas, I think he'll probably I think he'll probably be hoping for dry conditions, considering the pace that they showed in the sprint. I think in the wet, he's more likely to, at best, hold position. I don't think he'll really go any further up the field if it is a wet Grand Prix. For Zhou Guanyu, of course, he was took out by Pierre Gasly. I don't think there's really any blame that can be apportioned, if that's how you say it. Probably haven't said it right, but you know what I mean. I don't think you can really, blame 100% anyone in that incident, because it was just simply two cars, don't really go together at that corner. And I think Zhou absolutely had the right to try and overtake there, because he was, on the outside line. But just simply, like I said, the cars are too wide and that part of the track's too narrow to get through. So, yeah. But considering the pace Bottas showed, I think Zhou will probably be hoping for a dry race as well, because he might be able actually to make up quite a few positions and get in the fight for maybe the final point of the of the race, is what I'm trying to say. The Alfa Romeo looking pretty good, and of course they scored a couple points yesterday in the sprint, and if they were to finish where they started, or where they're going to start, then they'd make some decent progress on the Alpine, who are ahead of them. So yeah, looking good for Alfa Romeo at the moment. And Bottas, I think honestly, has been one of the drivers of the season. What do you call it? Bahrain outqualified Russell, which was hilarious, I have to say. Saudi, I thought he was pretty good. And then Australia, I thought he was decent, and ended up, in the end, really his experience, I think, showed with him being able to get into the points and finish, I think, was it 8th that he finished in the end, because he was able to just, not go for it too early and not be too aggressive when it came to overtaking and getting his way past cars that were clearly slower. And here, of course, Friday qualifying, 8th place, sprint race, 7th place. You cannot deny that this guy at the moment, he really is performing so well. And you never know, in the Drivers' Championship, in a couple of races' time, he could be ahead of his old teammate and the man who replaced him, which I'm sure will go down well at Mercedes. Anyway, move on to AlphaTauri. Yuki Tsunoda, by the way, I have to say, I thought did a good job, because he started 16th the sprint race and he finished in P12 and wasn't that far behind Russell in the Mercedes. So I thought Tsunoda did pretty well, and of course outqualified Gasly in Friday qualifying. So I think Tsunoda's doing a decent job at the moment. I just think the AlphaTauri car is just not that great. It's certainly not the car it was last season, and I don't think really AlphaTauri are going to be that strong of a team this season. I don't see them finishing in the top 5 of the championship at all. I just don't think they have the car. And plus, the teams around them, Haas and Alfa Romeo, have much more wind tunnel time allowed this season than they do. So, yeah, I think AlphaTauri are going to struggle really to finish any higher than 8th place, honestly, in the championship, which is a big drop-off from 6th last year. But yeah, I just don't see really AlphaTauri being that great this season. But there is a possibility of points today. The AlphaTauri, of course, still has Red Bull powertrain. The Red Bull powertrain cars are monsters down the straights. We saw that. We've seen that plenty of times this season, but we saw it in the sprint race yesterday with Perez's straight line speed in overtaking certain cars, and how Verstappen got past Leclerc as well. So AlphaTauri at least have that in their locker, so they can absolutely finish in the points with Tsunoda. But it's going to be at most probably a point or two, I think, with them. We'll see how Gasly does. Obviously, starting down in P17. If it is a wet race, you'd probably look out for him to see what he can do in the tricky conditions where really your skill as a driver does show. And of course, he has been a very good driver over the last few years. So we'll see how he gets on. And then we'll finally just go through the final couple of teams. Aston Martin. Vettel, honestly, I think finishing 13th, I think that was a very good job. to finish 13th. Because honestly, coming into the sprint race, I thought he would finish at best like 15th out of the sprint race, because I thought, and I still think, period, the Aston Martin is a really, really shit car. It is the most disappointing, without doubt, of the cars this season in terms of what we were expecting and hoping coming into this season. The car is just awful. There's nothing about it that looks good. Aerodynamically, it's an absolute shit show. And of course, doesn't help when you don't have quite the power coming from the Mercedes power unit as well. So, yeah, just terrible car. Vettel, though, did pretty well. If he could finish like 13th, 14th at least, I think that'd be a decent Grand Prix. I mean, he's not going to finish ahead of Hamilton because, I mean, Hamilton has 63 laps to get past, and the Mercedes is bad, but it's not as bad as the Aston Martin. Absolutely no way it's as bad as the Aston Martin. So, yeah, I think Aston Martin are going to be pretty shit. And then, final team is Williams. And, yeah, Williams have been pretty bad this weekend. Albon, though, if he can keep it together and do some good times, wet or dry, and maybe, again, do a super long stint, then there's absolutely no reason why he can't climb his way up the order and get a decent result. I don't think he'll finish in the points. I just don't think that's going to happen at all. But I think he could definitely progress his way up from P18. And by the way, let's just call it now. Nicholas Latifi causes the safety car at the end of lap 1. That's what's going to happen. Latifi will crash. Safety car will come out, last about 3 or 4 laps, and then the race will get going again. That's pretty much what I see happening for the first 5 laps or so of today's Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. But I'll just cut back to this picture and come and read your comments in the chat quickly. Just want to say, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it right there. I will be live in an hour and a half from now at 1:30 PM UK time with my co-commentator, hopefully Niblo, to take you through and commentate on the 2022 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. And then, as soon as possible, after the race finishes, I will be going live again with a race reaction stream. So, and that'll be probably about half an hour after the race finishes. Or maybe 20 minutes, we'll have to see. So make sure, if you are new to the channel, to subscribe for that. And as well, smash the like button and share this video and channel everywhere you can. And as well, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5. That is on Twitter. Also, I think I announced this on Thursday or Friday when I announced that I was going to be back this weekend. But I will also be uploading a video tomorrow on Monday, which will be kind of a more in-depth, deeper review of the Grand Prix, or, you know, of the big talking points of the Grand Prix. The reason it'll be an upload and not a live stream is because I have work on Monday and I won't be able to stream at the time I would normally stream because, like I said, I'm at work, say from late afternoon through to the evening on Monday. So what I'm going to do is basically record it as if it was a stream and upload that for Monday, probably tomorrow, Monday lunchtime. So about this time in 24 hours, basically. As well, if you want to know what my content schedule is going to be, say between this race and the next one, and what it will be probably for the next race as well, then make sure to tune in later as well to my race reaction stream, because I will get into that and what I'm going to be up to again between Imola and Miami, and what I'm going to be doing for the Miami Grand Prix most likely as well. But let me just quickly read out some comments in chat. So happy that you're back. Such great content. Thanks. Thank you very much. That's great to see. Dane, Hamilton might win the race from 14th if it rains. Yeah, no. In Imola, it's only raining in one half of the circuit. The other half is dry. It'll be interesting. Well, from what I saw, yeah, there are certain parts of the track that looked drier than other parts, but I wouldn't say it was bone dry or dry-ish in some parts of the track. Still looked pretty wet to me. Is there still a chance Mercedes to win the constructors? No, the Mercedes are not winning anything this season. They might win a race, but they're not going to win the championship. There's absolutely no chance. They are out of the championship race. And I know, was it Time in the chat says it all depends on the upgrades they bring to Spain. Even if they improve the car a bit, it's not going to get them really within proper touching distance of Ferrari and Red Bull. They are basically a complete new car away from competing with those two teams. They are, I mean, yesterday in the sprint, they were a second and a half off the pace of the front runners. They are not going to be competing for race wins anytime soon. And by the way, those upgrades, at the end of the day, in terms of, maybe after that Grand Prix they'll be better, that's all depending on the upgrades. If they don't work as much as expected, then Mercedes will continue to be absolutely nowhere. And I don't think Mercedes still have really a solution for the porpoising and just the general bad balance that their car has. I don't think they have the answers as of yet. Like I said, in my view, from what I've seen of the car so far, and done my own kind of analysis of what the Mercedes car is for this season, I just think the only way they can this season get on terms with Ferrari and Red Bull is by bringing a B car, which is a completely new car that you'd bring mid-season. That I've seen other teams do. McLaren did it, I think, in 2004. Force India have done it a couple times. Last time Force India did it, or now Aston Martin, but the last time they did it, I think, was when they were racing Point, actually. It was 2019, where first half of 2019, they were not that good. And then the second half of 2019, they were operating as if they were fifth in the championship, when previously they were like an 8th in the championship. So, yeah, I think on Mercedes, I think a lot more work has to be done, and a lot more upgrades have to be brought to that car, I think, than people realise. It's not a simple, let's just bring an upgrade and we'll be fine. That car needs a completely new just concept, design, and again, it needs to be a completely new car if it's going to get on terms with a Ferrari and the Red Bull. And with the lack of wind tunnel time they have compared to the others, that's not going to help either. Let's look at some other comments here. Dane, I think Chaz needs to do a video, Alonso versus Hamilton, compare both of them. Have I not done a video like that? I know I used to do videos. What was it? I did one. What was it? Hamilton versus Schumacher, which did very well. I can't remember how many views that's on, but it's done very well. Hamilton Vettel, I did Verstappen Leclerc. I did Alonso Vettel, I think, as well. Yeah, that might be something to look at that I could do. But to be honest, I want to do one where it's like an actually like contentious or up for debate. Because to me, I don't really think Hamilton versus Alonso is up for debate. I think Hamilton is quite clearly the superior driver. I mean, Alonso is still really, really good and a great driver, and can absolutely give Lewis Hamilton a run for his money on any day. But I still think Hamilton is the superior driver. Because obviously Hamilton, I mean, he was the better driver than Alonso in 2007 when they were teammates. And Hamilton has improved massively since then. And with Alonso, I think Alonso's improved since then, but he hasn't improved as much since then, to be honest. Do you think Latifi should be dropped? Asks Marco Catania. I need to look more deeply at it, but yeah, maybe. the thing is, yeah, he's having accidents, and that's obviously not great for a team like Williams when there's a cost cap and all that. But I want to look at really his pace, because at the end of the day, if he's miles off of Albon's pace, then I think, yeah, you'd have to say you need to find someone else to put in the car. But we have to remember as well, the Williams is a bad car. There's no doubt about it. It is a bad car. And I think the final comment that I'll read is from Blade Rise. Will this be the first season in Lewis's career that he doesn't get a win? I don't know. It's a 50-50. It really is a 50-50. Because, I mean, you'd need a race that's pretty crazy for it to happen, I think. Because I don't think Lewis Hamilton will win a Grand Prix this season on pure, like, you know, Mercedes and Hamilton were just simply quicker. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think it'd have to be down to other drivers having accidents or, you know, falling off the road or having reliability problems, and Hamilton ends up, you know, ends up finishing because of that. I just think that's really the only way. But that's totally dependent on, you know, will we get a race like that? I mean, of course, last year we had Esteban Ocon win a Grand Prix. Nobody thought that was going to happen going into 2021. So it could happen. But, I mean, I could see both scenarios playing out. You know, I could see him not winning a Grand Prix. I could see him winning a Grand Prix. It's hard to say right now. And remember, we have plenty of races left this season. Another, like, what, 18, 19 races? So, yeah, there's plenty of time for a race to come about where it's mental and it gives Hamilton a chance. But I think I will... I think I'll now come to the end of this stream. Thank you guys, by the way, for coming along to this race preview. Like I said, I'll be live in about an hour and 20 minutes probably from now for the race watch along for the 2022 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Make sure to join me and hopefully my co-commentator Nib for the race starting very, very soon. A race that could be very exciting, especially if the rain continues to fall and stays on track. But yeah, thank you guys for coming along. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Bottom right of the screen, you do it right there. Smash the like button and share this video and channel everywhere you can. And as well, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5. And don't forget to, as well, to join my Discord server, link below in the description for more content like this. But guys, until my race watch along starting in an hour and 20 minutes from now, it has been me, ChazHD. Goodbye.